I just love this picture because you take a look at this picture, reindeer can solve all of our problems. Look, a source of milk, it provides clothing, economic development, freight services, even a source of transportation, and it's solar powered. How about that? But what I want to talk about is this lovely picture right here, is reindeer as a meat animal. And I'm a meat eater. I love meat. I eat a lot of meat. I probably eat too much meat. Some of you in this room, you may be vegetarians, but I suspect a lot of you eat meat as well. This is the meat consumption across the world. And you can see U.S. likes to be #1 in everything, but actually we're #2 in meat consumption per capita per year. We eat 124 kilograms of meat per year. And that's about 270 pounds. So that's about 2/3 to 3/4 of a pound of meat a day. Wow, that's a lot of meat. It's way more than we need to eat. But I do the same because I love to eat meat. But I have an opportunity to eat meat because I live in a very affluent country, the United States. We see a very good relationship. If you live in a well-off country, you tend to buy and consume more meat. Very good relationship between GDP and meat consumption. We have a country that in the world where its economy is going to take off, China. It has a huge population. And we can already see they are importing and consuming a good deal of the world's meat. So we, as Alaskans, like I said, we eat a lot of meat. We eat the 270 pounds a year. It's red meat, it's turkey, and it's chicken and pork. And on average, we eat about 60 pounds a year of red meat. We Alaskans, we probably eat a little bit more. And so I just wanted to give you an idea of the meat dynamics in the state of Alaska. Where do we get the meat that we consume every day? We have some local meat production. We raise beef in Alaska. These are statistics from 2009. We produced a little over 1 million pounds of beef, but that's carcass weight. That's not amount of boned meat. That works out to about 760,000 pounds of beef we produce locally a year. We produce some reindeer, not too much, but then we have this wonderful, beautiful meat production system here in Alaska. We are so fortunate to have this meat source, our wildlife population. You know, I have to give credit to ADF and G. They get criticized a lot over a lot of things they do, but for the most part, they manage the population, the wildlife population of this state sustainably. So my granddaughter, she loves moose meat. She said, "Papa, can I have some more moose meat?" So I feel very comfortable with the way things are run in this state, that my granddaughter's daughter will have the opportunity to eat moose meat. But even with all of our great wildlife sources, all that put together, we only produce about 10 million pounds of red meat a year in the state of Alaska. And if we look at the demand, population about 700,000 in Alaska, demand per capita 60 pounds. We consume approximately 42 million pounds of red meat a year. We import almost 32 million pounds of red meat a year. I'm going to talk about that. We should be a little bit concerned about that. Where does that meat come from? Our daughter-in-law, she was a vegetarian until she met our son and met us, and we eat a lot of moose meat, and she started to eat red meat. So one day around the dinner table, while she consumed 4 pounds of moose meat, I asked her, you were a vegetarian, how can you eat meat now? And she said, because I only eat meat from a sustainably produced system. And that really struck me. That is something I should take to heart. And you know, I think that's something everybody should take to heart. As something as important as our food production system, with our expanding population, we're depleting the Earth's resources. Geez, maybe we better sit back and think about ensure our food system is sustainable. And what do we mean by sustainable? There's a lot of definitions. I use the word all the time, and I really don't know what it means. But, you know, our government knows what it means. And it even passed a law. And just like our government, it's very concise and succinct. But let's just take a look at it. It's defined, or sustainable agriculture. It's an integrated system of plant-animal production. That sounds pretty good, a whole integrated system. Having a site-specific application, I like that. Maybe what's sustainable here isn't sustainable over there. Wow, maybe the government, sometimes they might have their act together. Over the long term, well, sustainable, that's what you expect. Satisfy human food and fiber needs. And I like this, enhance environmental quality and the natural resource base. I don't know, I think that's a gotcha, but we're going to talk about that. Upon which the agricultural economy defends and make the most efficient use of non-renewable resources and on-farm resources. I think that means fuel, fossil fuels. And where appropriate, use natural biological systems. You know, I kind of like this. I get lost in all of it, and I don't really quite understand what it means, but I think I do. I like it, and I hope to follow it and promote it. So we have a choice in Alaska to buy our meat in different places. I purchased this T-bone steak at Homegrown Meats. It's produced by Huffman Farms out on Chino Hot Springs Road. The price is $13.99 a pound. These are reindeer steaks. This is the good stuff. You can buy this maybe very occasionally at Homegrown Meats. When we have a call at the farm, you pay $25 a pound for this. This is our good old Rancher Select from Safeway. And I love the advertisement at the Rancher Select. It's $7.49 a pound. Which meat do you buy? I bet almost everybody buys this, $7.49 a pound, because it's cheaper. Well, let's look at it. Where does that meat come from? It starts out from a cow-calf operation. Its operations is just a bunch of female cows, and they produce calves. And it's usually on pasture, and it's on public rangelands. And for the most part, I think it's managed sustainably. You know, these guys with all these large pastures, You know, they want to maintain the integrity of these pastures for the long time, and people that use public rangelands have to graze sustainably because it's mandated by Congress. If you use public rangelands, you have to graze sustainably. So by and large, these cow-calf operations are probably run sustainably. So our red meat, we buy at Safeway, probably starts out from a sustainable production system. But the calves, they're weaned at 6 to 8 months, and they go to a stocker and backgrounder operation. And there, they're grazed more intensively on pasture, and they're starting to be fed grain. And they're kept there till they're 8 to 14 months. It's to transition them to grain. And I really don't know a lot about these operations, whether it's sustainable or not, but if you look at the government definition, probably not. Now we get to the good stuff. That calf at 8 months goes to a feedlot. That meat you bought Safeway, that calf that started out in this nice green pasture ends up in a feedlot. Large operations, they're there until they're 12 to 22 months of age and raised to 1,400 pounds. They're fed grain. They're in these concentrated facilities like this, up to 5,000 to 10,000 animals in an operation. And here's where we see the first stage of vertical integration. I don't know if what you know that means, but that's a large company controlling the operation all the way from the start to the end. And the argument is, well, if we control everything, we'll keep costs down. Is that operation sustainable? Do you think this is sustainable? Let's talk about it. Here's a feedlot. The animals are there. They're given a lot of feed. You put feed in one end, you get stuff coming out the other end. What do you do with that? You liquefy it. These are sewage lagoons, the waste lagoons from these feedlots. Some of these facilities, there's 40 to 50 million gallons of liquid sewage. What are we going to do with it? What they try to do with it, they try to spread this liquid fertilizer on the fields in hopes it'll work its way into the soil. But we overload the ecosystem. The ecosystem can't possibly break up and use all of this fecal material. So what happens when it rains? It goes into the water system. In that water system, all this sewage flows into the rivers that we have to drink out of. The large companies, they have a great business model. And this vertical integration, but what they do, they get a local farmer to buy the land, to get a loan, to build the facilities, and then the large company will sell the operator the feed, will sell him the cattle, but then he'll buy the cattle off. And the landowner is responsible for the waste management, not the big company. The vertical integration for the profits, externalize the liability, the costs. These guys right now, they're having a tough time of it. A lot of them are being fined. A lot of them are going out of business, bankruptcy. And a lot of this stuff is getting into our water system. And so next time you buy that steak, I want you to think about that. But also, I want you to think about, there's an event coming up, April 15th, a lovely day. I'm part of the 99% and paid taxes. And we just write that check to IRS, and lots of times we don't have a good idea where it went. all that waste that ends up in our water system, those farmers that go bankrupt, who paid for that? I did. You did. So this $7.49 a pound, okay, maybe it didn't really cost $7.49 a pound. Maybe it cost a little bit more. So we're going to put $5 bill there to represent that cost. Wow, the stuff we produce here in Alaska is starting to look a little bit better, isn't it? Now it goes to the marketing. That piece of meat goes to these large companies. And it's just dominated by a few companies. And can we influence quality of meat with these large companies? I don't know. McDonald's is the largest beef buyer in the world. It purchases 1 billion pounds a year at $1.4 billion and goes into Big Macs. But also, I don't know if you recognize this. This is the new USDA food pyramid, where, you know, what we're supposed to eat. We're supposed to eat a lot of grains, then vegetables, and not a lot of protein. But I want to point out this pyramid is our subsidies, our agricultural subsidies. Between 1995 and 2010, we spent $260 billion in subsidies. You know where the majority of that went? 74% went into meat and dairy. So that check you write to the IRS April 15th, wow, guess where it goes to? This meat industry is controlled by these big companies, and they're heavily subsidized. Wow, guess who pays for it? So, doggone it, we need to put another $5 bill on that Safeway meat. Wow. The stuff we produce in Alaska looks better all the time. But I also want you to picture producing this meat is heavily dependent upon fossil fuels. You know, I ran across this quote: it takes a gallon of gas to produce 1 pound of beef. So next time you buy this steak at Safeway, just imagine washing it down with a gallon of gas, because that's how much it took. By the time it gets up here in Alaska, it probably takes considerably more energy than that. And when you hear the price of gas is going to go up a little bit, what do you think is going to happen to the cost of the meat that is so heavily energy dependent? That's the first thing I think about, is when I hear the cost of gas going to go up. Oh, man, the cost of meat's going to go up. I better make sure I go out and get a moose this year. But in this country, we're very fortunate. We have a lot of public range lands. It's land that we couldn't use for anything else, crop production. But we can put livestock animals on this rangeland. And we can take this vegetation we can't normally eat, and we can convert it into meat, and we can consume it. In all the public rangelands in this country, like I said before, it's mandated by Congress. They have to be managed, grazed sustainably, conservatively. Well, here in Alaska, we have 15 million acres of public rangeland. Most of it is out on the Seward Peninsula. It's a very unique rangeland. It's a tundra ecosystem. So we have 15 million acres of public rangeland that we need to try to convert into meat. And how are we to do that? What's the best way to do that? What species of livestock is best adapted to control grazing on these 15 million acres of rangeland we have out there. I'll give you a hint. Reindeer. And so that's why I want to give a little pitch for our research program, our reindeer research program. Because, you know, we get some criticism is how come you put how come your school puts so much effort into research in reindeer? It's because we have all that rangeland that we need to try to utilize to exploit. The only species we can do that is with reindeer. If that was 15 million acres of grassland, we should be working with cattle or bison or something else. If it's scrubland, maybe we should be putting more of our work into goats. But it's not. It's tundra. So that's why we're putting a lot of effort into exploiting those rangelands using this critter right here. And I wanted to point out, reindeer are domestic animals. I hear all the time comparing reindeer to caribou. Oh, they're just the same thing. Reindeer are just tame caribou. No, they are not. They are two completely different animals because reindeer went through the domestication bottleneck. Reindeer were domesticated from a Eurasian deer a long time ago over in Asia. Not even anywhere close to our caribou. And we domesticate animals through a process of artificial selection. An animal has a characteristic that we like, and we increase its survivability. We eat everybody else, and we just allow the animals with characteristics we like to breed. And through that, we can domesticate some animals. And animals we consider domesticated. They're kept for a distinct purpose for our benefit, and they've been genetically modified. And also they develop some other traits here where they cannot survive in the wild. Reindeer, when in the presence of predators, cannot survive without the stewardship of humans. It was a while back, somebody cut our fence open to try to let the reindeer out, probably with the idea, oh, you need to release the reindeer, let them back into the wild. That doesn't work that way. As soon as they got out away from people, they're gone. The predators take them out right away. Reindeer depend upon us for their survival. But I want to talk a little bit about the domestication process because it just points to how special reindeer are. There's 14 species of large ungulates we consider domesticated, and you know here are the ones we usually eat. And then here's what we call the minor 9, which include reindeer. But you know, the world contains a lot of animals that we could potentially domesticate and eat. But we've only domesticated these 14 species. That's because in order to be domesticated, to get through this domestication bottleneck, they have to have 6 characteristics. If they're just short 1, we can't domesticate them. And these are diet. They have to have a generalist diet, which reindeer do. There's 2,000 reindeer owners in the United States. Everyone has a different diet. You can use a lot of different range plants and a lot of different other crops and forages and cereal grains to develop diets. They have a high growth rate. The calves grow up to ½ pound a day. The adults about 1 pound a day. But also this growth rate is very compatible with Alaska. They eat a lot, they gain a lot of weight in the summer, but then their appetite goes way down in the winter when there's not that much to eat. They have to be capable of breeding in captivity, which our deer do, and they have to have a good-natured disposition. And it's absolutely amazing. We can take thousands of reindeer that have been out on the free range for a whole year, not a bit around humans. You can put them into a corral system. You can walk out there. You're perfectly safe. They move all around you. No problem at all. You try to do that with bison or elk, which a lot of people think are domesticated or should domesticate. You let those bison or elk roam around out there for a year. You put them in a corral. You try to walk out there. You're not going to last very long. And this is very important because then you can work these free-range animals in close quarters. You can work with them. They have to have a tendency not to panic when threatened, and they have to be able to establish a social structure, a dominance hierarchy. A few years back, there was a lot of noise about moose farming. Oh, let's farm moose. You can't. You stick moose, a bunch of female moose in a pen, in an enclosure. They do not establish a dominance hierarchy, a pecking order. They just flat out kill each other. So anyway, so you have to have those 6 characteristics which reindeer did. But during this process of domestication, we've selected for docility, gregariousness, and these other characteristics showed up. Increased color variability. You know, this happened with dogs and cats and cattle and everything else. And I'm going to talk about this, paedomorphosis, reduced brain reduction, earlier maturation, and this reduction of stress response and aggression and activity patterns. But there's this, which we see with all domestic animals. Dogs are a very good example. They have the puppy face. The adult dogs have retained their juvenile features, a puppy face. Shorter face, broader skull, increased flexibility in the neck, playfulness is carried on through adulthood, and these other juvenile behaviors like barking and eating in cats. Reindeer exhibit all these characteristics. This is Elsa. We lost Elsa, but she was a very docile, gregarious, social animal. Her head shape was a little bit different than some of our other animals. Very broad forehead and shortened face. She had the domestic characteristic of the face. Now, at our research facility, our breeding, we've sort of done haphazardly in the past, and I have to admit we haven't done very, very well. It's just sort of been haphazard. Now we're trying to adopt a new method. We're trying to select for docility and a meat animal. We're measuring the distance between the antlers and the length of the head, so we're selecting for an animal with a short, broad head because that's correlated with very docile animal. And we're also measuring the girth and the length so we get more meat. So we want a very docile animal with a lot of T-bone steaks. So reindeer and caribou are very different. They're different genetically, they're different behaviorally, they're different physiologically. They're not cousins, two very different animals. There are different breeds of reindeer. They were selected for different purposes. If you go back to that first slide, there's reindeer you milk. They have larger udders than other reindeer. There's reindeer you ride. They're very large. They look like horses, very tall and very robust animals. Our particular breed is a Chukotkin breed. It was bred for meat. Just look at that profile. Wow. It looks pretty good. And It has a very high meat-to-bone ratio and very fine muscle fibers. So we have an absolutely perfect animal to take care of our range resources. We introduced reindeer quite a while ago, 1892, out on the Seward Peninsula. The population increased tremendously. We had 600,000 reindeer in Alaska in the 20s and 30s. There's reindeer everywhere. It's hard to go to any community in Alaska and not find reindeer in their history somewhere. But I like to point to this because it just demonstrates we have a great potential to raise a lot of reindeer because we did it before. We had a large meat production infrastructure back in the 20s and 30s, and we were exporting meat to the lower 48, reindeer meat, and doggone it, we need to do it again. This operation was run by the Lonemans. They were a non-native organization. The reindeer were originally induced for the benefit of Alaska natives, and there ended up some conflicts, so a law was passed, the 1937 Reindeer Act, where only native Alaskans can own native reindeer. Non-native Alaskans can own non-native reindeer, like George. George can own Canadian reindeer, but he can't own Alaskan reindeer. This act, I have to tell you, it causes a lot of controversy, a lot of conflict, but I just have to tell you, when you go to Safeway and buy this steak, do you think about who produced it? Do you think, was that person Hispanic or black or Jewish? Did they produce this meat? Maybe did they have a little advantage on the grazing lease? No. We need to get beyond all that and do what's good for Alaska. And that's it, to increase our capacity for food production, whether it's reindeer, whether it's goats, whether or whatever it is. We just need to get past all. We're better than that. So how are we to do it, and how do we as a university and as a research program, how are we trying to promote and build up a sustainable red meat industry through reindeer? We work closely with the range, with the landowners, BLM, State of Alaska, to set up monitoring sites to ensure all grazing is sustainable. We develop these tools to, I think this is pretty cool. There's a lot of information that goes in here, but a reindeer herder we have a designated website. He can go to the website. He can pick a particular nutrient or like protein or day. He can plug it in and he can zoom in on his range, and this map will show the best grazing areas on that particular day. And so he can look at he can go on the web, he can input all this, and and this is protein. He wants to move his animals to an area with high protein, good growth, and it's the green areas. He can take a look at this. Geez, this time period I need to move my animals over here. Pretty cool tool. We work with them on herd health management with different projects. This is a project, Mark talked about collars earlier. A lot of people use collars. We use radio collars, but there's a lot of people that wonder what's the effect to the animal. A lot of reindeer herders don't want to put collars on their animals because they think if they have a collar, especially on females, that they're not going to produce a calf that year. And so we're just trying to figure that out with a particular project. We work with them with animal husbandry to reduce stress. we want everybody to handle and work with their animals stress-free. Not only does it increase your production, but it's very important for meat quality. But we have some few obstacles. Back in 1996, we had this caribou herd, the Western Red caribou herd. The population expanded tremendously. They changed their migration route and washed over the Seward Peninsula and pretty much wiped out the whole reindeer industry from 1996 till 2002. We lost 75% of the reindeer industry. It set us back. Otherwise, we would be cutting into that 32 million pounds we import every year. We developed this system to try to combat the caribou problem. The caribou have some satellite collars. Well, what we did, we put satellite collars on the reindeer, and the reindeer on free range, and there's no roads. It's very remote. It's hard for a reindeer herder to keep track of his reindeer out on these large remote ranges. And so we put collars, satellite collars on the reindeer. The signal comes down into the location is sent to us. We set up an automated mapping system where a herder can go to a website, put in his password, the map comes up, and he can see where his reindeer are at. But he can also look at the Fish and Game site and watch where the caribou are, so he can move his reindeer out of the way. This is our good friend Jimmy Noyakut, and we put a collar, and you can see this is, you can go to the web and get this, and you can see this animal is right here on this particular day. But now we have another problem, predation. With caribou, there came a lot of wolves. Predation is the biggest problem we have out there. I showed you a picture of Jimmy Noyakut. His herd was just about wiped out from predation. He would lose 6 to 10 reindeer a day to wolves. That was and I think it's absolutely amazing. See the collar there? You know, we didn't fix these pictures at all. It's just amazing to me that these animals can be completely consumed, but the collar's still there. And same there, you can see the collar. But what we're trying to do, we're trying to, again, use our automated system. We're putting GPS collars on the deer, and we can get locations every minute or every 5 minutes, and we want to see, do the reindeer exhibit a particular behavior when they're being chased by wolves. And we're setting up an automated system, and if they show that behavior, it's going to alert us, send an email, or set off a siren in the herder's living room so he can go out there and deal with the predator. We've also worked with the herders and introduced a new way to manage their reindeer when the caribou have moved in. They put them in enclosures, and we've converted them over to a feed, and so the reindeer herder can keep in these enclosures while the caribou move by, and when the caribou are gone, then you can move the reindeer back out. When we first did this project, I went out, we worked with Merrill and Henry. We were going to let the reindeer out of the exclosure. They'd been in there all winter, they'd been fed, and we were worried once they got out, they were going to take off across the country. Never see them. And so I went out there, and we're all ready. We all had snow machines waiting for these reindeer to take off. We opened the gate, the deer wouldn't leave. We could not get the deer out of the pen. We eventually did, and they would go out and graze. It was 2 weeks later, a bear showed up. A bear showed up. What do you think the first thing the reindeer did? They went right back in the pen. And this new system worked very well. A lot of the herders now, want to go to this management system. It really helps with predators. Merlin has a great story. He went out to check his reindeer in the enclosure one day. Outside the fence, there was a sow grizzly and 2 cubs sitting on one side of the fence. On the other side of the fence was reindeer just watching each other. And so, but the reindeer, they got to figure it out. Those bears can't get me as long as I'm on this side of the fence. Then we do a lot of work down here because hopefully there's some people that will raise reindeer captively behind fence. And so we have worked on different diets, and we are evaluating different pasture grasses. But most importantly, we want to look at the effect of diets that the reindeer are eating on meat quality. Bottom line, that's the most important thing. How does what a reindeer eat affect its flavor and affect the nutritional characteristics of the meat? We're looking at haylage right now. We're trying to get them off. People are willing to spend a lot of money for reindeer meat because they have the perception it's a very wholesome product. And the last thing we want to do is feed them a bunch of grain and take away from that wholesomeness. And through our work, we've seen that if you take reindeer off a forage diet and put them on grain, we see more of the saturated fats in the meat. And so we want to keep them more on a forage diet because the nutritional profile of the meat is much better. We have an active educational outreach program. And at first, when you bring a reindeer to the schools, all the kids think of Santa Claus and reindeer. And you know what? I'm trying to take the magic out of Christmas with those poor kids. As you know, reindeer aren't to pull this chubby guy in a red suit around. We have them here to eat. But I think that's important. If we're going to use them as part of our food production system. We have a hard time marketing reindeer meat. And when people come and visit, the first thing they go, oh, there's those reindeer, they're so beautiful, look at them. And oh, it's so hard to eat them when you look at them like that. Except for me, I look back here at the strip loin when I look at them. And we do a lot of meat science. Because bottom line, that's what it's all about. We've done the dressing percentage, how much yield you can get from each class of animal. We can get down to the individual cuts. We know the differences in the nutritional characteristics of bulls versus steers, and at what different season out on the free range they have a different diet through the season. How does that influence taste of the meat and the nutritional characteristics? We worked on that. So what we really want to do when you go to the store and buy a reindeer T-bone steak, there's an expectation there of quality and taste. And we want to make sure we have everything all put together and work with the industry, work with the producers, where we can always produce a uniform, high-quality product. Because I've heard lots of stories, you've heard lots of stories, and you probably had experience where you've had bad caribou or reindeer meat. And because it was maybe slaughtered at the wrong time of the year or wasn't processed properly. And we can't have that in our commercial market. We're looking at, and I didn't really like this project, but we're looking at pre-cooked packaged reindeer meat, and it works very well. But I hate taking that beautiful product and pre-cooking it and putting it in gravy in a pouch. We're looking at different carcass suspension techniques. Most carcasses, this is the typical way you hang a carcass, but what we found, if you can add tension to the meat, when you age it, when it goes through rigor, by hanging it from this bone here. It puts a lot more stretch on the muscle tissue. We get considerably more tender meat. And we're also, like I said, looking at the effect of pasture on the nutritional qualities of the meat. And we're trying to develop reindeer diets where we can produce a very healthy, wholesome product. And I have to tell you, reindeer meat is the best in the world. And I may be a little biased, but we've got the numbers to demonstrate it. It was quite a while ago we did a project comparing reindeer and caribou to beef. And I did all these different comparisons, moisture. It's a low-fat product. You cut the fat off, much lower than beef. Now look at protein. Protein, reindeer and caribou have more protein. And they have more of this thing called myoglobin. Myoglobin is a pigment in the muscle. It helps to transfer oxygen from the blood to the muscle tissue. Reindeer and caribou have a greater capacity for work, need more oxygen, and so they have a higher myoglobin content. Why does this matter? Reindeer meat is darker red than this very expensive piece of Safeway T-bone. It's a lot darker, and it's the myoglobin. Well, it's iron. The myoglobin molecule is iron. It's actually, health-wise, it's great that reindeer meat has more iron. But it ends up being a problem when you cook it because it's iron. If you don't cook it properly, it can give the meat a livery taste. And a lot of people have called reindeer a liver on the hoof, and that's mainly because it hasn't been cooked properly. And you have to be very careful of how you cook reindeer meat. Just some different properties. All this means here, reindeer has a sweeter flavor than beef. It makes very good stews and soups because it gives the soup and stew a sweeter flavor. But when I wanted to do this is tenderness. We sent our meat samples down to the University of Illinois. That is beef country. There was no way they were going to let reindeer and caribou meat be, the results come better, beat the beef. So they cheated. They stacked the deck. They went and bought the most expensive piece of prime rib they could. And to make sure the beef would be more tender and have all these characteristics more than reindeer. But you know what? We still kicked their butt. Reindeer and caribou, but these end up pretty significant, is much more tender than any meat in the world. We're not quite sure, but reindeer and caribou is the most tender meat in the world. This is George's project. After the talk, you can go back and you can sample some reindeer meat, reindeer sausage. George is going to be back there serving. And while you're back there, I want you to ask him about his project. A lot of the reindeer meat that we will bring to market will have to be frozen. So we are wondering if freezing the meat will degrade the product. And George is just finishing up his project, and we found freezing does not reduce the quality of reindeer meat. As a matter of fact, I have to ask George, I think in some of the characteristics it actually improves it. And this is something we just started to do. I think this is the key, not only for the reindeer industry, but I think for a lot of the Alaska red meat industry. We purchased a mobile slaughter facility. You know, the reindeer out on the Seward Peninsula, they're scattered around, and you just have some small isolated villages. How are you going to get your reindeer slaughtered under inspection to be able to sell it in homegrown market? It's a problem. So we came up with the idea to have a mobile slaughter facility built, And this can either be barged to the different villages, or each individual village can go ahead and purchase their own. This plant here is capable of doing a USDA slaughter. This is becoming very popular in the western states of the lower 48 because the big companies are pushing out the small producers. If you just produce a few cattle, it's extremely difficult to get them slaughtered in these large company-controlled slaughter facilities. So these are becoming very popular in the lower 48. And I think to support the meat industry here, whether it's beef or anything else, I think this is going to be the way to go. But unfortunately, what we wanted to have this up and running. This was built for cold weather, but it was built for cold weather by people down in Washington. It has been a nightmare trying to get this thing up and running. Good old Alaska weather, the cold weather, the wind and the snow. It's a challenge, but we're getting there. I think we've worked a lot of the bugs out of this thing. So if anybody is ever going to go ahead and buy or have one of these built, I can tell you what not to do. And this is very important because you can have a piece of reindeer meat, a very good quality piece of meat, and so many people don't cook it right and they ruin it. So we are developing recipes to properly cook reindeer meat. Remember I told you it has more myoglobin, it looks redder. People tend to cook reindeer and caribou meat to color. If they see it's pink or red, oh, it's not cooked yet. And it's not done, so they cook it some more. But because it has more of the red pigment, you can cook it to the same temperature as you cook your beef, which looks done. Your reindeer and caribou still looks rare, even though it's been cooked to the same temperature. So people tend to overcook it. So we're coming up with recipes and cooking methods along with the meat production. Because we're putting out a great product, we don't want you to ruin it when you take it home into the kitchen, because it is not like beef. It is a different product. It needs to be cooked differently. And last but not least, we just wanted to get an idea in the anticipation of getting a reindeer meat market going. And we wanted to get an idea of price and demand. So we worked with Jeff Johnson at Homegrown Market. We put some reindeer meat down there, and he would go ahead and market the reindeer and keep track of demand and prices he could get, and he would give us that information back. And we found there's a high demand, and there's people willing to pay a lot of money for reindeer meat. So to wrap it up, you know, I'm a little bit biased. I love reindeer. I love reindeer meat, but I see it as an important, sustainable meat source for Alaskans. I'm telling you that with the price of fuel and everything coming up, I'm telling you, reindeer and our locally produced other red meat is going to be a lot more attractive. And if you look at the real cost, it is a bargain. So I call it Tundra Gold. But also, we're producing the meat here. The money we generate from our own meat production system, that money stays here. It's not going elsewhere. So with that, I'm done.